The smoke alarm in the 43rd floor conference room had been going off for 11 seconds before anyone thought to look for the source. It wasn't a fire, it was Laurel Quinn. She was standing at the far end of the room holding a very expensive espresso machine, or what had been an expensive espresso machine, and watching steam pour from a crack along its side like the thing had decided after years of loyal service that today was simply not the day. "I just pressed the button," she said to no one in particular, the button that said press. The room was silent except for the hissing. 12 people sat around a mahogany table long enough to park 2 sedans end to end. 12 people in tailored jackets and pressed shirts with agendas printed on cream-colored paper and water glasses filled exactly to the line. 12 people staring at Laurel Quinn like she had walked out of a different dimension entirely, which in a sense she had. She had meant to be on the 39th floor. She had gotten on the right elevator. She was almost certain of that. She had pressed the button with the right number. She had stepped out when the doors opened and followed the signs that said Facilities Management, because that was where the interview was. The interview she had been preparing for since Tuesday. The interview that was supposed to start in 4 minutes. But the signs on 43 had said Facilities Management too. Someone had put up the wrong placard, or she had misread, or the building had a grudge against her specifically. She hadn't figured that part out yet. What she had figured out was that she was standing in the wrong room, that the espresso machine was ruined, and that the man at the head of the table, the one with the silver watch, and the expression of someone who had never, not once in his life, experienced an unplanned event, was looking at her like she was a variable he didn't have a formula for. His name, she would learn later, was Declan Marsh, CEO of Marsh Capital Partners. Net worth, the kind of number that had too many zeros to say out loud without feeling slightly unwell. Right now, he was just a man watching steam destroy a $3,000 coffee maker. "Which department?" he said very quietly. "Are you from?" It wasn't really a question, it was the kind of statement that expected an answer immediately and a resignation letter shortly after. Laurel set the machine down carefully on the credenza, the way you'd set down a live animal you weren't sure about. I don't actually work here. I'm here for an interview. Facilities Management, 39th floor." She paused. "I think I'm on the wrong floor." One of the men to Declan's left, 40, reading glasses, the look of someone who had given his whole soul to a spreadsheet and found the arrangement satisfying, pressed his lips together. Another woman across from him covered her mouth with 2 fingers. Declan Marsh did not move. "You walked into a board meeting," he said. "I did, yes. You used the machine. It said press. I thought it says press to indicate that the steam function is already active and should not be further engaged." Laurel looked at the ruined machine, then back at him. "That's a terrible label." Somewhere to her left, someone made a sound that was almost a laugh and then quickly was not. Declan stood. He was taller than she'd expected, which was already taller than most, and he moved with the kind of controlled economy that suggested every motion had been assigned a purpose, and anything without one had been cut. He walked to the credenza, looked at the machine, looked at Laurel, and then said to the room at large, "We'll take a 20-minute break." Chairs pushed back. People filtered out. The woman who had covered her mouth caught Laurel's eye on the way past and gave her a look that could only be translated as "good luck, you're going to need it." And then it was just Declan Marsh and Laurel Quinn and a dead espresso machine. "Sit down," he said. "I really should find the interview will wait." "Sit down." She sat. He pulled out the chair across from her, which surprised her because she had expected him to stay at the head of the table like a king receiving a subject. Instead, he sat close enough that she could see his watch was engraved on the back. She couldn't read the inscription from here, but it existed, which meant someone had given it to him and meant something by it. "Tell me your name," he said. "Laurel Quinn." "What position?" "Facilities Coordinator." The posting said. "I know what the posting said. I approved it." He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at balance sheets. Not unkindly, exactly, but with the specific attention of someone who needed to understand exactly what they were working with. "You have a background in facilities?" 12 years. "Before that, I did property operations for a hospital system in Ohio. Before that, I was an office manager for a civil engineering firm." She folded her hands on the table. She had learned over the years that the best way to handle a room that felt unsteady was to find one thing to hold still. "I'm very good at what I do. I'm also clearly not great with directions in new buildings, and I appear to have a complicated relationship with certain categories of appliance." His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. A small recalibration, like a calculation revised. "What kind of relationship?" he said. "Electronics." She said it the way you'd admit a medical condition to a new doctor, plainly, without drama, waiting for the response that would tell you whether this person was going to take you seriously. Watches stop. Streetlights flicker. My last office had to replace the card reader on my floor twice. I don't know if it's static or something weirder, but it's been consistent my whole life, and I've learned to work around it. She paused. I probably should have mentioned the espresso machine before I touched it. Yes, Declan said. You probably should have. Another silence, but this one was different from the first. The first had been the silence of 12 people trying to decide whether to be alarmed. This one was the silence of one person thinking very carefully. The interview is at 2 o'clock, he said finally. You have, he checked the watch, 8 minutes. I know. Go to the 39th floor. Take elevator bank B. The placards here are being replaced. Facilities made an error in signage. You're not the first person to end up somewhere unexpected today. Laurel stood. She straightened her jacket. She was almost to the door when he spoke again. Mr. Quinn. She turned. The espresso machine was already broken, he said. The steam valve failed this morning. Maintenance has been called. She didn't know what to do with that. So she nodded and walked out and found elevator bank B and was on the 39th floor in 4 minutes, sitting across from a very normal HR coordinator named, she would later forget, something beginning with J, answering questions about her 5-year plan. She did not get that job. She found out 3 days later via a form letter that thanked her for her time and wished her well in her search. She had been offered to more qualified candidates, which was the particular phrasing HR used when they meant no but wanted it to feel like weather rather than judgment. She had applied for 11 positions in 4 months. She had interviewed for 6. This was the 3rd rejection. She was keeping count not because it was useful but because it was the kind of thing her brain did when she was anxious, organized, cataloged, made a list. Her apartment had more lists in it than furniture at this point. She was sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea she had forgotten to drink when her phone rang. Unknown number. New York area code. She almost didn't answer. She answered, Miss Quinn. The voice was unhurried and precise. This is Declan Marsh. Her tea went cold while she stood very still in her kitchen trying to understand what was happening. I have a proposal, he said. My head of operations resigned last Friday. I've had the position posted for 9 days. I've interviewed 4 candidates, a pause that felt less like hesitation and more like punctuation. None of them noticed that the 3rd quarter variance report presented to the board this morning contained an error in the capital expenditure projection that, if acted upon, would have resulted in a $17 million misallocation. Laurel said nothing. You noticed, he said she had. She hadn't meant to. She had been standing at the back of the room with the ruined espresso machine, trying to figure out her exit, when her eyes had moved to the projection screen the way they always did around numbers, automatically, helplessly, the way her ears went to music in a noisy room. The figures had been up for 30 seconds before she'd left. 30 seconds was enough. The column totals hadn't matched. It was a small discrepancy, a decimal error compounded across 3 line items, the kind of thing that happened when someone updated one cell in a spreadsheet and didn't check the dependencies. But at the scale Marsh Capital operated, small discrepancies were not small outcomes. She had noticed. She had said nothing. She had been in the wrong room with a broken coffee machine and had not thought it was her place. How did you know I noticed? She said. Because you looked at the screen for 22 seconds before you looked at me, Declan said. And the expression you made was not the expression of someone reading a slide. It was the expression of someone finding something wrong. She sat back down. Her tea was cold. She didn't notice. I'm offering you the Director of Operations position, he said. The salary is listed in the posting. Benefits begin on the 1st of next month. The work is demanding and the hours are not predictable, and I have been told by multiple people that I am difficult to work for, which I think is an overcorrection from people who prefer comfort to precision. Another pause. I would prefer someone who finds errors I miss. I believe you are that person. You've met me once, Laurel said. For approximately 4 minutes. I've also reviewed your resume, which HR sent over after your interview. I spoke with your former supervisor at the hospital system in Ohio, and I watched you manage an unexpected situation in a room full of people who were waiting for you to be embarrassed, and you weren't. Laurel was quiet for a moment. Outside her kitchen window, the city made its usual noise. Sirens 3 blocks over, a delivery truck backing up, 2 pigeons on the fire escape conducting what appeared to be a very urgent negotiation. If I take this job, she said slowly, I'm going to break things, not on purpose. But it happens. The steam valve on the espresso machine had been failing for a week, Declan said. I should have had it serviced. That's a facilities problem, which is now your department. It wasn't quite an answer, but it was the kind of response that told you something about how a person thought. I'll need the full job description, she said. I'll have it sent tonight, and I want to negotiate the title. Director is accurate, but the scope of what you're describing sounds more like VP of Operations. A silence, then, agreed. She started on a Monday. The offices of Marsh Capital Partners occupied floors 40 through 45 of a building in Midtown that was efficient rather than beautiful. Glass and steel arranged with the specific intention of communicating competence rather than warmth. Her office was on 43, which was where the boardroom was, which meant that every morning she walked past the credenza where she had destroyed the espresso machine, which had been replaced with a newer model that had a significantly more explanatory label. She did not touch it. Her assistant, a 24-year-old named Owen who had the energy of someone who had read every productivity book ever published and was extremely enthusiastic about systems, brought her coffee in a ceramic mug every morning at 8:45. This was not a request she had made. He had simply identified the pattern by day 3 and implemented it. She liked him enormously. The work was, as promised, demanding. Marsh Capital was a mid-size investment firm that had grown faster than its operational infrastructure, which was the polite way of saying that the internal systems were a collection of inherited processes, acquired software platforms that didn't talk to each other, and habits no one could explain the origin of. Her first week, she asked 3 separate people why vendor invoices were printed, signed, scanned, and emailed back to the vendor before being uploaded to the system, and received 3 separate answers, none of which were the same. She started a list. The list became a project. The project became a presentation. The presentation, delivered to Declan on a Tuesday afternoon in the 4th week, outlined a 17-point operations overhaul that would reduce processing time by an estimated 30% and close 4 compliance gaps that currently existed, only because no one had looked at them directly in 3 years. Declan read the full 40-slide deck in 14 minutes. She knew because she was sitting across from him and she counted. "This is good," he said when he finished. "I know." He looked up. There was something in his expression, not quite surprise, more like the recognition of something he hadn't expected to find here. "You're not uncertain about it. I spent 2 weeks verifying every number before I brought it to you. I don't present things I'm not certain about." He set the deck down. "Neither do I." He said it simply, without emphasis, the way you'd state a fact about the weather. "Most people hedge. They say I think and possibly and it might be worth considering. That's usually fear of being wrong," Laurel said. "I'd rather be wrong clearly than right vaguely." The corner of his mouth moved. It was the smallest possible movement. If she hadn't been looking directly at him, she would have missed it. She had been looking directly at him. She told herself this was because she was assessing whether her proposal had landed. It was a reasonable professional explanation. She filed it under that category and moved on. The overhaul took 8 weeks to implement. 3 things broke in the process. A payroll integration that had to be rebuilt from scratch, a vendor contract that turned out to have an exclusivity clause no one had flagged, and a phone system on floor 41 that began routing all incoming calls to a fax machine that the company had not known it still possessed. She fixed all 3. The fax machine was discovered to contain, among other things, 14 years of unread messages from a dry cleaning service that had been trying to reach an executive who'd left in 2011. "I feel like I should call them," she told Owen. "As a courtesy." "I already did," Owen said. They were very relieved. By the end of the 2nd month, Declan had stopped scheduling formal check-ins and started appearing in her doorway instead. Not often, not without reason, but with a regularity that began to feel like its own kind of rhythm. He would lean against the frame and ask a question that was usually about operations and occasionally about something else entirely. Once it was about Ohio. "You grew up there?" he asked, on a Thursday afternoon when the office had gone quiet and the light through the windows was doing something generous with the city. "Born and raised. Dayton." She didn't look up from the vendor reconciliation she was working through. "You've probably never been." "I have, actually. Site visit for an acquisition 2019. She looked up then. "What did you think?" "Understated," he said. "In the specific way that places are when they're not trying to convince you of anything." It was not the answer she had expected. She filed that too, under a category she hadn't named yet. The error that would change everything surfaced on a Wednesday morning in the 8th week, and it surfaced the way most important things did, quietly, in the middle of something else, when she wasn't looking for it. She was reviewing the annual report draft before it went to the printer. Standard procedure. She had added herself to the final review workflow because she did not trust final reviews that didn't include someone whose job it was to worry about the details. She was on page 47 of 62 when she stopped. The infrastructure investment total didn't match. Not by a little. By enough. She pulled up the underlying data. She pulled up the model. She pulled up 3 previous years of reports for comparison. She sat with it for 40 minutes, going back and forth through the numbers the way you'd check a door you weren't sure you'd locked, until she was no longer checking and was simply certain. The annual report contained a consolidated infrastructure investment figure of $340 million. The correct figure, once the subsidiary adjustments were properly applied, was $283 million, $57 million, reported incorrectly to investors, in a document that was going to the printer at 4 o'clock. She stood up, closed her laptop, and walked directly to Declan's office. He was on the phone. He looked up when she opened the door, assessed her expression in approximately 1 second, and said into the phone, "I'll call you back." He put it down. "What?" "The annual report has an error," she explained. She was precise and she was fast, and she watched his face go through several things in quick succession. Attention, recognition, a brief internal calculation, and then the particular stillness of someone who has understood the full weight of something and chosen not to panic about it because panic was not useful. "How did the subsidiary adjustment get missed?" he said. "I don't know yet. That's secondary. Who else has reviewed this draft? Finance, legal, the external auditors, and none of them know." He was quiet for a moment. Outside his office, the city continued its business, indifferent to the fact that a $57 million reporting error was sitting on a conference table 1 floor down waiting to go to print. "Stop the printer," he said. "Already done. I called down before I came up here." He looked at her for a long moment. "How long have you known?" 40 minutes. I wanted to be certain before I brought it to you." "You spent 40 minutes verifying a number you were probably certain about in 5. I spent 40 minutes making sure I was right." She said it simply. "I'd rather take the time and be right than be fast and be wrong." He nodded. It was a slow nod, the kind that meant something more than agreement. "We have 3 hours before the window closes on the filing delay," he said. "I need to call legal and the external audit team. I need you in that meeting." He picked up his phone, and Laurel, it was the first time he had used her first name, she noticed. "Good catch." The next 3 hours were the kind that compressed time, dense and fast and full of the particular energy that comes when a lot of very intelligent people suddenly need to solve one specific problem very quickly. She sat in the conference room across from the legal team and the auditors and Declan, and she walked them through the discrepancy 3 times until everyone understood both the error and the correction. And then she sat quietly while the people whose job it was to respond to these things did their jobs. At 7:14 in the evening, the corrected report was filed. At 7:22, Declan's assistant, not Owen. This was Kathleen, who had worked for Declan for 9 years and had the bearing of someone who had managed crises so many times that she had developed a kind of serene immunity to them, appeared in the doorway of the conference room and said, simply, "It's done." The room exhaled. 2 of the lawyers started packing their bags. The lead auditor, a measured man named something Hartley, shook Declan's hand and then, unexpectedly, turned and shook Laurel's. "Good eye," he said. "We should have caught it. I'm glad you did." She said thank you. She meant it. When everyone else had left, Declan and Laurel were alone in the conference room with the remains of a working dinner that had been ordered at 6 and mostly ignored. She was looking at the city through the window, 43 floors of it, which at night was very different from 43 floors of it by day, all the glass and steel replaced by light. "You should go home," Declan said from behind her. "So should you." A pause. "Yes." She turned. He was still at the table, one hand resting flat on it, tie loosened for the first time she'd seen it, and he was looking at her with the expression she had filed under the unnamed category, the one that wasn't assessment or analysis, the one that meant something else. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. When you called me after the board meeting, when you offered me the position." She found the right word slowly. "You said you'd spoken to my former supervisor and reviewed my resume, but you made the decision before that, didn't you?" He didn't answer immediately, which was the same as answering. "You made the decision in the room," she said, "when I said it was a terrible label. When you set the machine down carefully," he said. "Even though it was already broken, you handled it like it mattered." He said this as though it were a data point, which she was beginning to understand was how he expressed most things that mattered to him. In the language of observation, of specificity. Most people would have put it down fast and backed away. You put it down like it was worth being careful with. The city outside went on doing what cities do at night, which is carry an enormous amount of human life in a very small amount of space and somehow not collapse under the weight of it. "I'm going to break more things," she said. "I need you to know that. I know that. The card reader on 41 has already started acting up." "I know that too. Owen filed a maintenance ticket," she laughed. It surprised her a little, the timing of it, the uncomplicated way it arrived. He looked startled, as though the sound had hit something in him that wasn't expecting to be hit. "You should laugh more often," he said, and then appeared to realize he had said it out loud, and looked, for the first time in her acquaintance with him, briefly uncertain. She decided to let him be uncertain for a moment because it seemed like something he needed to experience occasionally. "Go home, Declan," she said. "The report is filed. The crisis is managed." "Yes," he said, "it is." He did not go home first. He walked her to the elevator, which she thought was an efficient use of direction since they were both leaving the same floor. Then he walked with her through the lobby, which was slightly less efficient, but she didn't mention it. Then they were on the sidewalk, and the night was the kind of warm that New York does in early September, the kind that feels like a small gift before the cold comes to collect. "I live east," she said. "West," he said. "Good night, then." "Good night, Laurel." She was half a block away when she turned back, not because she'd forgotten anything, but because the city at that hour was particularly well lit, and she had, for reasons she was not going to analyze on the sidewalk, wanted one more look. He was still standing there. He had not moved. He was watching her walk away with the expression of a man who had run the numbers several times and arrived at a conclusion he wasn't sure yet what to do with. She turned back around and kept walking, but she was smiling. She didn't try to stop it. The months after that were a study in the specific kind of tension that exists when two very precise people try very hard not to say the obvious thing. They were both, in their different ways, people who did not do things without being certain, who checked the numbers before presenting them, who wanted to understand a thing fully before committing to it. Declan asked her to dinner in November. He did it the way he did most things, directly, without preamble, standing in her office doorway on a Tuesday at 6 o'clock with his coat already on. "There's a restaurant on 57th Street, he said. "I made a reservation for 7:30. She looked up from the budget reconciliation. "Is this a dinner or a dinner?" "If it goes well," he said, "it's a dinner." It went well. They were at the restaurant until 10:15, which was well past when either of them would typically have stayed anywhere by choice, and they talked about Ohio and about systems and about the particular loneliness of being someone who noticed everything and couldn't always explain why that was exhausting. At one point she told him about the watches, every watch she had ever owned, the analog ones that gained 15 minutes overnight, the digitals that simply gave up, and he listened the way he always listened, fully and without commentary until she was done. "It sounds like you leave a mark everywhere you go," he said. "Usually the wrong kind." "I'm not sure that's true," he said, and the way he said it, quiet and certain, landed somewhere it was clearly meant to land. The card reader on 41 stopped working permanently in December, which was embarrassing but also, Owen pointed out, had been failing intermittently since before Laurel arrived, and the building management had already ordered a replacement system. She felt it was important to note this in the incident report. Declan found the incident report on his desk with a sticky note that said, in her handwriting, "For the record, the card reader was already losing." He kept the sticky note. She found this out later, in the specific way you find things out later, by being in a place where you weren't expecting to find something, which she was beginning to recognize as a pattern in her life. She had gotten very good at making the best of wrong rooms. The annual company meeting was held in February, at a hotel ballroom on the east side, 600 people from every division and satellite office, the kind of event that required a full operations team working for 3 weeks in advance and a very detailed run-of-show document that Laurel had written herself. It went well. Everything functioned. The AV system, which she had worried about and stress-tested twice, performed perfectly. Even the lighting cues hit on time. At the end of the event, Declan stood at the podium and gave the remarks she had helped him edit. Clear, specific, the kind of address that told 600 people what they'd accomplished and why it mattered without being vague about either. She was standing at the back of the room where operations people stood at these things, with an earpiece and a timeline and a clipboard. He found her there afterward, in the crowd that was doing the thing crowds do when a formal event ends and everyone becomes suddenly social. He appeared beside her without announcement, which was one of his habits she had grown used to. He moved quietly for such a deliberate person. "It went well," he said. "It did," the AV behaved. "Yes, I was surprised too. He was quiet for a moment. The room continued around them, loud and warm, glasses clinking, 200 conversations happening at once. I bought a watch, he said. She turned to look at him. He extended his wrist. It was a simple watch, analog, no obvious name on the face, the kind that was expensive in the way that things were expensive when they didn't need to announce it. You know it might stop, she said. I know. He looked at her steadily. I thought it was worth the risk. She was aware of 600 people in the room and also aware that the room had suddenly gotten very small. Declan, she said. Laurel, he said. She took his hand, the one with the watch, and held it for a moment just to see. The watch kept running. She didn't know if it always would. That was the thing about some things. You couldn't test them in advance, couldn't run the model before you committed to the outcome. You just had to decide that the uncertainty was something you could live with. The watch was still running the morning they got married, which was a Saturday in April, with the kind of light that made everything it touched look like it had been there all along. Owen cried. Kathleen did not, but she had the expression of someone who had been hoping for this particular development for quite some time and was privately pleased with how it had resolved. The card reader on 41 sent an error code at 9 a.m. that morning because of course it did. Laurel saw the notification on her phone while she was getting her hair done and sent Owen a text, and by the time the ceremony started it had been fixed. Some things you learn to work around, some things you fix. Some things, it turns out, were just waiting for the right person to come through the door, even if she came through the wrong one.